Go. Am I being heard? Okay, folks, I will call our meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. Just go over a few meeting logistics to get started. Anyone who's joining us remotely, I would appreciate it if you would change your name display to the first and last name so we know who we're talking to and who's talking to us. Anyone who speaks similarly, we would ask you to state your name and where you live. We would ask you to keep any comment questions to 3 minutes, and city staff will help us in keeping track of the time. Anyone who is speaking about a specific agenda item, please keep your comments germane to that item. Anyone who wishes to speak must be called upon by the mayor. Once you're called, you may make a statement or ask questions. And again, limit your comments to 3 minutes. Anyone who speaks out of turn, goes on too long, or discusses non-germane topics may be reminded to come back within the scope, and we're always happy to accept written comments from anyone who wishes to make them, and those are shared with the entire council. Next is to approve the agenda. Any suggested changes to the agenda? Oh, and we have 2 members appearing remotely, so I'll call on them to introduce themselves. Tim Heaney.
Tim Heaney, District 3.
And Palin.
Willing Cohn, District 2.
Thank you. Okay, hearing no suggested changes to the agenda, we'll consider the agenda approved. Next, we have general business and appearances. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to address the council on any topic that is not on tonight's agenda. And as with other parts of the agenda, we ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes in length. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to be heard? Come on up.
Lisa Edsonville, State Street. I'm here regarding the work happening around the residential properties flooded in 2023. What I am here asking for is a plan. It's been more than a year. We're at a year and 3 or 4 months, and we still don't have a plan. And so what I'm asking for is a project plan for each property as needed, timelines, detailed milestones, who's responsible for each of those steps, and concretely identifying any steps that must occur to ensure elevations can actually begin in 2025. Because as we know, there's some steps that should have already happened and certainly need to happen immediately, or it will not even begin in 2025. Additionally, we're asking for an overall neighborhood plan. How is each property impacted? What does the watershed look like? What's the future use of each of the properties that are being changed? And finally, and just as importantly, clear, transparent communication. We do not get the same messages. Different homeowners get completely different messages. We get updates on individuals' properties that aren't ours, but that individual doesn't get those properties. We're willing to share the information. That isn't the issue. We don't have communication. We're looking for updates on each project in one communication. We'd really like to see it every 2 weeks. What's going on in each project every 2 weeks? And finally, forming work groups as needed. We just are begging to actually see things in writing so we can plan. Are we doing something this year? Are we doing something next year? How many more years are we going before we get to start? And it's amazing that after this many months, we still don't have that. And I keep asking for it. And so now I'd love to see this happen. Otherwise, if it's easier for me to come to each council meeting, I can come to each council meeting and we can do the updates here if that works better.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can respond to that because I appreciate, so we generally agree with that. I'm happy to provide regular updates. I can tell you where we're at right now. The state did approve the money. State's asked us for 3 documents. 2 of them had been submitted. One, I don't know if it did get in today. No, so they're waiting for one last piece of information, should be in today or tomorrow. I guess it'll be tomorrow at this point. Once that happens, we will get a sub-grant agreement, which will then outline for us what procurement process we can use in order to hire contractors. We just got that information from the state last week of what they needed from us. We're turning it around as quick as we can, including information from our insurer. Once that happens, we can then procure engineers, contractors, all that kind of thing. We've already talked to some engineers that we think can do the job. We already talked to contractors that think will be available in 2025, but we don't know from the state yet what that process will look like. So we can't tell you until we know. And again, we expect to know that shortly. So we understand we've been pushing. That's I'm trying to think what else was in there. Am I missing something, Mike? No. Yeah, so that's where we're at. We can't tell you how we have to go about acquire. So there's, states and things have procurement process, purchasing processes. We are hoping they will allow us to use our own, which means we can move faster, but we don't know that. They haven't told us what it is yet. So once we do that, then we can connect you with who's going to be doing the work, then we can do plans. We understand that 2 of the properties in your neighborhood are eligible for elevation. 1 is going to be demolished. So that's what I know as of this afternoon. So yes, all of that you say makes sense. And once there is a project, meeting regularly and communicating regularly about who's doing the work, when it's doing, all that stuff will have to happen. But we can't give you those timelines because we don't know what, we can't do anything until the state tells us what our purchasing timelines are, what our process is.
And this sort of highlights the problem in not having it written down with responsible parties, because I contacted VEM and I CC'd people from the room. And VEM then turns around and says, no, we're waiting on the city.
Yep.
We need a written plan,
Yep.
not just for you all, but for us.
Yep.
For those of us living in it, and we don't have that. And if what that says is we're on this stage, we're gonna have to wait for VEM, let's identify that so that we can hold them responsible, so you all get what you need to continue to move forward. But this is ridiculous at this stage.
And I want to be clear. The first thing I said is they're waiting for 1 document from us. We just got this last week. They needed 3 documents from us, including an insurance declaration and a statement of risk. We've got 2 of them in. The statement of risk was being worked on, should be in by tomorrow morning. So they won't give us the sub-grant agreement till they have those documents. So that is correct, that they are still waiting for 1 thing from us. We're on it. It's a high priority. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying blaming VEM. I'm saying that they need that, then they give us the sub-grant agreement, and then they give us the procurement process. Once we have that and we know what's allowed, then we can go forward and procure the services, and then we have an actual project, and then we will be. So I think you're getting accurate information. It's just, it's what depends what day of the week it is, whether who's waiting for who.
And you know what? I don't want to waste the council's time with a back and forth of giving a bunch of demonstrations on why we're not getting the same information. And just because you know what the timeline is, this is highlighting, this is what we should be getting every 2 weeks. So we know what's going on, so we can plan. My understanding is that Ed just found out this morning that his project may be moving forward with lightning speed, at which point he needs to make plans around that. We are not getting this communication, and we're not getting it timely.
Okay.
So I don't know anything
you
about Ed's
should.
project, but yes, fair
You
enough.
should.
And I agree with you.
You should. Thank you. Anyone else in the room? Steve?
Steve Whitaker, Montpelier. Garbage has not been emptied. We've never gotten the adequate number of cans back after the flood, and that seems to be a simple thing to correct. I think there was washed cans that were left out of the stump dump, but now people are dumping garbage. I see today on the front of the old lobster pot steps, or Necky, or the old Hugos, bags of garbage just being discarded. The photo you're seeing there is 4 or 5 dog feces. And this is after the can has been emptied. I've raised this with the street supervisor, that his people need to be cleaning up around the cans when they empty the cans. But this is atrocious to have 4 or 5 bags of dog feces left around surrounding the can while the can was emptied in the last few days. The stairway, that floated away from Enna 15 months ago, is still laying in Confluence Park East, where the electric in that park. I spoke to water and sewer people when they were out there doing some work. It was going to be removed because it needs a big piece of equipment to lift it. No action, months and months later. There's an old street light from the Lobster Pot. The city acquired those properties to do the bike path. They left an old fluorescent or street light there on a pedestal. It's buried in the tree, but it needs to be removed. Now we've got a double pole because they just replaced the pole for these electric chargers. We still have not adopted the policy. I know, Jack, you agree that it's wise to require utilities working in the right of way to give prior notice to the city, because while that street work was going on School Street, Consolidated decided to park in the middle of State and Main and do their work, simultaneously creating a huge cluster screw of traffic, and not enough flaggers. The double poles are there's right behind Abishans. One of them is on the Abishans land, but they're in a right-of-way easement that the city manages. The city needs to come down hard on getting those double poles removed. The sand on the bike path, the council was misled or lied to about whether that has been swept. There's no runoff drainage from Confluence Park that's redistributing the sand. The sand is a foot thick in Confluence Park. It hasn't been mowed. It hasn't been shoveled out. And it's been laying across the bike path. It has not been swept. And it's still there, a hazard to bicyclists who go around that corner on sand, and it's dangerous. The shopping cart is still in the river. What is this, the 3rd or 4th year?
That's your 3 minutes.
Yeah, I know you care about that shopping cart being in the river. 3 or 4 years after it's been called to your attention. So.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to? Nope. Come on, Ed.
At Haggett State Street. I'm wondering if it's appropriate to ask if Josh can give us a quick update on buyouts.
Do you have information, Josh?
I guess the only new information is one buyout's been approved. Kickoff meeting for that property. It's Mary's and Terrace property, 189 State Street. I'm having a kickoff meeting with VEM on Friday. That property was submitted through FEMA's SWIFT current program. The other 2 buyouts were submitted through FEMA's HMGP program, 2 different programs. Mary's was submitted through Swift Current because she qualified for Swift Current. It's a new program. So that's the extent of the updates.
Okay,
I'll
thanks.
know more on Friday.
Great, thanks. Anybody else in the room?
Hey, Jack, I forgot to mention, that dog poo is right in front of City Hall. That photo is right in front of City Hall.
Thank you. Anybody online who wishes to be recognized? I should have mentioned it's easiest for me if you operate the electronic hand signal on your screen. Okay, I think that's the general business and appearances, which brings us to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
All right, and all right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. That brings us to, yes,
Did Tim and Palin introduce themselves?
yes.
Okay.
Were you saying it? I thought
Yep. Thanks. All right, Next up, appointments to the Planning Commission. We have 4 applications for 4 vacancies. I think, let me get back to that point on the agenda. What's your pleasure, folks? Yes, Carrie.
Can we just confirm that there are 4 applications for 4 vacancies?
Mike, do you know the answer to that?
Mike Miller, Planning Director. I know there were 3 applicants. There are 4 vacancies. But I believe there were 3 applicants that we've gotten so far. So I'm trying to go off memory. So we had 3 seats that were coming up for renewal, and then we had Carlton that had stepped down. He has a year left on his. So there's 1 seat with 1 year left, 3 seats that are 2-year seats.
Okay, and what I'm seeing from the cover sheet is there are 4 people: Maria Arsenlis,
Yep.
Gabriel Lajeunesse, Sean Linehan, and Leah Candland.
Okay, so the first 3 are people who are already on the planning commission, are looking for getting re-upped. And the 4th is the new person.
Uh-huh.
So you can,
So it might make sense to appoint her to the unexpired remaining year of that
Entirely up
term.
to you.
Okay. All right. Is there a motion? Well, yes, Lauren.
I move we appoint Maria Arsenlis, Gabrielle Lajunas, Sean Linehan to 2-year terms on the Planning Commission and Leah Candland to a 1-year term on the Planning Commission.
Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks. As always, thank you to everybody who applies to volunteer for these jobs. Next up, Country Club Road and Rec update.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
I can.
Great, okay,
Oh, can't speak for everybody.
awesome. So I am also monitoring the Zoom, just so everybody's aware, so I'm doing double duty here. But just to introduce myself, Kelly Murphy, Assistant City Manager, and I've got Mike Miller here, the Community Development Planning Director. And so I'm gonna just tee things up for this conversation. It's kind of a 2-part conversation, focusing on the status of recreation and housing at the Country Club Road site. I just want to start with saying that we're not really looking for action tonight. We're really looking to get you information and provide status on these 2 particular items. On the call, I've got Alan Becker, who is with Power Wellness. He's going to be providing you with a brief presentation of the findings from their study for the public process. And so just getting on to a couple other details that I wanted to note based on what was in the council packet, because there's a lot in there. And so just to kind of sort it a little bit and just to provide context. So the Country Club Road Actionable Master Plan calls for a recreation needs assessment for the recreation community zone. And so we tried to mirror what was done in that plan for this process. And so you'll hear a little bit about that in a few minutes. And then Mike is going to provide you with an update on the housing components of that plan. And so in terms of recreation, just to kind of level set, where we are. In the packet, there were details provided from, if you can believe it, 5 years ago. So December of 2019, when Bread Loaf did a renovation study of the existing building. So we provided you with those numbers along with an updated set of numbers so you can kind of see what those renovations would look like. So you'll get the report from Power Wellness and what they found, but I also wanted to give you a sense of what it would cost to renovate that building based on those plans. And so just to give a thumbnail sketch, the original plans, the option 2 or upgraded version as presented by Bread Loaf would have been about 4.7 million. And so if we took that forward in today's dollars, it would be about 7.6 million. The other thing that I do want to note is that we are currently working on some asbestos remediation within the building. And so that is factored into both plans. The new revised version, there's $95,000 for hazardous material remediation, excuse me. And the old plan, it called for 72,000, or actually it's the inverse. So it's 95 old plan, 72 new plan. And so currently the city is in phase 1 of this remediation. The total cost of that remediation is 55,000. There will be a second phase, which should be complete within the next month or so. And that final phase is working through the pipes. We've just completed the first phase, which is the boiler room. And so the other thing that I want to note here is that we also have on the table a US DOE thermal energy storage grant for 1.2 million. There is a $300,000 city match to replace the heating and electrical service at the rec center. So we're working on executing that grant agreement. The asbestos work will be credited as part of the match. If the DOE grant is factored into the renovation of the recreation center, we can anticipate that the cost would likely be updated from 7.6 to 6.8, which would be less the 531,000 for the upgraded HVAC and the 156,000 for the lighting and electrical. So that is a lot to kind of give you a sense of where we're at, but just to, if we were to renovate, we're looking at, depending on what we do, the high end, probably 7.6, the lower end with the DOE grant factored in about 6.8. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Power Wellness. They're going to provide an overview of where we stand with the assessment of the Country Club Road site.
Can I just jump in? So thank you. Kelly really did hit it, but just to reiterate that the goal for tonight, particularly on the rec side, is for you to sort of be thinking about the different options, to hear the presentation, ask questions, and then at an upcoming meeting very soon, then we're going to need some guidance of where we should be pursuing. But we thought rather than try to throw everything at you tonight and ask for a decision, that you have a chance to absorb this, hear the information. But we, obviously we need to think about, are we going to be looking at the rec center on Berry Street? Are we going to be looking at Country Club Road? Are we going to be not doing anything? If we look at Country Club Road, what are the choices there? Because there are a new number of options and proposals on the table that we would, brief you on as we got going. So just wanted to set that as you're listening to Alan and you're asking questions. It's really with the goal of teeing us up for a new conversation as soon as the next meeting to really start charting our course.
So Alan, I can see that you're out there in Zoom land. And did you want to share your screen?
No.
And you're muted at this point, Alan.
Okay, I'm unmuted. I thought y'all were gonna show the PowerPoint.
So we certainly can do that. I have
Okay.
allowed for you to share your screen if you'd like, but if you would like us to share the PowerPoint, then you'll just need to give me a minute to do that.
Okay.
Actually,
okay?
could I get the lights back, please?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We'll take care of that. Thank you.
just sit tight for a minute here. Okay, I think we are sharing the screen now. I'm going to minimize this. And Alan, if you want to take it away, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you very much. We really appreciate an opportunity to make this report to you today. And the first thing I wanted to emphasize is that the purpose of our trip to Montpelier was not to do a feasibility study, but to determine if there was enough interest on the community's part in doing a feasibility study. A feasibility study would obviously have a lot of data points in it. It would have a lot of demographic research behind it. And the purpose of this trip was really more to get a sense of the mood of the community, for us to take a look at existing facilities, and for us to based on our experience to kind of tell you what we thought the possibilities were. And I just want to make sure, can everybody understand me clearly?
Yes, coming.
Okay,
Very
thank
quick.
you. So these were really the major issues we kind of focused on in our 2 days of meetings and discussions. What the community support a news center? Is there a partner there to participate in the development of the center? Where should the center be located? And are taxpayers willing to support this? Now, obviously, we're asking these questions. They're kind of difficult questions to answer because we don't know what it is or what it's going to cost yet at this point. So when you ask somebody if they think a new recreation center is a good idea, or remodeling and renovating the existing recreation center is a better idea, it's really hard for them to answer. This report is really more based on some opinions. We had a lot of great participation in both the meetings we held in Montpelier and then the three subsequent remote and virtual meetings that were held. We got some great feedback, and it was great to be able to visit there. So on to the next slide. What we did is we reviewed the master plan that you had done and various studies that you had. We held focus groups. We toured existing recreation facilities with the recreation director, and then we had the 3 public meetings. And this is a list of the groups that we met with individually. So there were a lot of people involved and a lot of great input. And we got to tour all, I believe, of the existing city facilities. So now let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what we heard. And again, this is not based on hard scientific data, though there is a survey that was conducted that has some very interesting results. There was definitely almost, I would say, unanimous support from the people we met with in those focus groups that there needed to be something larger and newer. The existing recreation center is simply too small. It's impossible for it to house many more services than it does today. It's not an ideal facility, and therefore investing $7 or $8 million in it might not be the best long-term decision. We also had a lot of people who talked about how Montpelier really needed, other than being a wonderful city to live in and a beautiful place with a great downtown, there needed to be other reasons to attract the people to the community. And this was particularly felt by the hospital and the difficulty it's had in recruiting physicians. Now, of course, recruiting physicians to small communities is a problem all over the country. It's not a problem that is particular to Montpelier. Physicians tend to want to practice in larger communities for the good reason of that it's easier for them to get backup and to have people to share call with. And that's just a reality of a small community. But Montpelier does have a lot of very positives. And so if we don't invest in a new facility, we're going to kind of fall behind our neighbors who are investing in those facilities. Montpelier has a very long and deep winter. And so that creates the requirement for more indoor facilities. But there was a lot of opinion that getting an agreement on funding is going to be difficult, particularly when we don't know what that number is, and particularly because a number was thrown out by a previous consultant that was probably unrealistic and that shocked a lot of people. So next slide. These are some kind of, let's say, softer thoughts that we heard from a lot of people. And there's obviously, multiple sides to this equation, which makes it algebra, and I'm not good at algebra. But Montpelier is a walking community, so the fact that the recreation center is walkable for certain people is a great benefit. There was also a lot of concern that if we're going to be investing money in any place, we need to be investing money in rebuilding our infrastructure because of what we went through with the flood. People aren't going to want to raise taxes because they were already too high, and people don't want to have to use their cars. So they're going to be people that are resistant about going to the country club site. On the other side of the equation, that is considered to be something that would bring more people to town if we had a new recreation facility on the country club road site. There is an extremely active and vocal group, the Hub Group. We talked with them several times. They have a serious and I think well-intentioned desire to get involved and to develop certainly racket sports. And there needs to be more conversations about that because it's very hard, since we don't know what any of this is going to cost, to get agreement on is this a reasonable price, because we don't know what the price is. So right now it's kind of pie in the sky. So next slide. There was an online survey conducted by the city, which I think was great. It got a lot of responses, and it really, I think it was very consistent with what we heard in the focus groups. If it had been inconsistent with what we heard in the focus groups, we'd be a little worried, but it wasn't. I think it was very consistent. People wanted this facility to be centrally located to the point that it can be centrally located. And people were interested in the same things that we see people interested in most of the communities that we work in. And we work all over the country. And we work in a lot of very small communities, and a lot much smaller than Montpelier. Everybody wants an indoor pool. Indoor pools are great. People want walking or running track, and they want space for fitness and group exercise classes. And they want a focus on nutrition because, we have restaurants advertising things that we all enjoy, but no, maybe we shouldn't eat as much of. And one of the things that a recreation center can do is help to send out a different message about nutrition. And if we go to the second page, or rather the next page of this survey, we have some really interesting graphics here. And you can see that an indoor swimming pool, which everyone loves an indoor swimming pool, was the thing that most people mentioned, followed by walking tracks. Now, in some communities, you wouldn't have walking tracks as the second choice. But given the nature of the way Montpelier is laid out and the beautiful paths that you have, and the new paths that you have on the country club road site, and the fact that people are very outdoorsy, they like things they can do in the winter as well as the summer. I think the walking tracks, trails as a second choice makes a lot of sense. A workout gym room was mentioned by a lot of people, was very important. Childcare, very important. Um, and and then when you look at the circles, how do you see yourself being involved with the services at a center? Um, Mostly people are interested in participating and bringing their children there. I think those numbers line up with what we see in most communities. Um, and the same thing for question 11, the weighted average there of 7.62. This again is in line with what we see in other communities, both large and small. People want pools. Obviously, pools are very expensive. They're the most expensive, thing to put in a recreation center, and you have to look at those things really closely. The walking paths and hiking is something that's very inexpensive to develop. And the fact that the community is really focused on that is a nice thing, and I think will draw a lot of people to these facilities. So now if we go on to, I think, the last page in our deck, we have been developing community recreation, fitness, and wellness facilities for 27 years. We're the largest operator of these types of facilities in the country. And so you hired us because I think to some extent you wanted to hear our opinion after we visited Montpelier. And our opinions are pretty clear. And I know there may be people that disagree with them. I think some of these will require more of a proper kind of formal feasibility process. But the first thing that became obvious to us is that Berry Street is not a good long-term option. Berry Street doesn't do anything well. It barely provides basketball well, and the community deserves better basketball facilities than that. We know that people love the walkability of Montpelier. They love the attractiveness of downtown. But there is no location downtown that's suitable for developing a recreation center which will appeal to the wider community. There's no parking, there's no land available. It's a nice thing to think about, but we don't think that long term it's the right solution for the community. On the other hand, we've done more than 100 of these studies. As I mentioned, we have worked all over the country from Arizona to Wyoming to California. Our breath was taken away when we saw the site on Country Club Road. It is absolutely beautiful. I know a long line of people that wish they had a piece of land like that as close to their community as you do. And I think it gives you a lot of options for the future. Um, we also were kind of surprised by the condition of the building, of the Elks Lodge building. From the outside, it's as ugly a building as I've ever seen. But once you get past the exterior and get into the building, every room is kind of a surprise of another opportunity that's presented. The fact that there was already childcare there, and there's, the little toilets for the children. There's a portion of the building that actually has a very tall ceiling that used to be a ballroom. The building is in pretty good structural condition. It presents a lot of opportunities. Yes, it needs a facelift. And it needs some improvements in the wayfinding, which will probably happen with an exterior hallway. You probably can't fix it through the interior, but that building is an asset that needs to be explored in more depth. We think that you could add on to that building. You would add on if you wanted to do racket sports or another basketball court, you could add on in a modular fashion. You could start with the building that's there, do this in phases so that you're not faced with a 30 or $40 million thing you have to bite off all at once. And finally, we think there should be some discussions with the hub group about some type of public-private partnership and see what financing options they have available and how the city and the hub group might work together. So those are our opinions, as succinct and as clear as we can deliver them. We think that for next steps, what you might consider, and this is on the next slide, is, and the slide below this, is that you do consider doing a real feasibility process where you do look at the demographics, you look at what people are willing to pay, what they can pay. From that, you develop a preliminary space program. And very importantly, we have to look at what the community's willingness is to invest money. And that has to be on the table, because it would make no sense to do a feasibility study and come back and say, spend $20 million when the fact is you simply can't afford it. We want to make sure that we understand when we start this process what's the reasonable range of money that might be available and when might that money be available, so we can talk about phasing this in over time rather than looking at one huge big project that will frighten and scare a lot of people. And we do our feasibility studies in two phases. We do an initial phase and then we do a second phase. So you don't have to commit to as much of an expense when we start. And if we get through the first half and it doesn't look like it's possible, then we say it's not possible from a business case perspective. And let's, call it a day at that point. So that is our report. And I know there may be questions. I'm not exactly sure how you want to do this, but I am available to listen in and answer any other questions that there may be.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Let's start with the folks here on the council and see what questions people or thoughts people might have. Yeah, Adrian, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was informative, and I did attend one of your focus groups. And I know that people had really good comments and feedback. But what I'd like to learn a little bit more about your experience in the 100 studies that you have done across the country is I'd like to learn more about how these communities have funded these projects and different funding models. I mean, we talk about private-public partnerships, but what other creative ways and incentives and regional partnerships might you have seen to fund these types of activities?
Well, the majority of funding mechanisms is through some kind of bond issuance. The traditional way that you would fund road construction or any other new project. We do see the second funding mechanism are local healthcare foundations. Those are more of a rarity, but sometimes they exist. We did a project in Winter Park, Florida, using a foundation's money. They were interested in wellness and they thought this was the best way to do it. Public-private partnerships are much more complicated, and they take a longer period to negotiate up front. And obviously, a public-private partnership is a partnership where the public allows a private individual to use their land or a facility that they have. And tax revenues or membership dues pay the private party back. That's how the financing works. It is complicated to arrange, but there are certain cases where it works, or where the conversation around public-private partnerships might lead to a different arrangement that's more of like a traditional foundation arrangement, or somebody agrees to subsidize something for a certain period, number of years. I think it's important to know that this is not a business that has much of a return on investment. Is the nature of all public improvements. We do them because we think they're good for the community. And when we see a private investor that wants to do one of these things for a return, we usually are not we don't recommend those situations, because the for-profit gyms, they make their money on financing. Well, a city's not going to do that. You're not going to hold people to membership contracts and go after them because they don't pay their dues. So that's kind of what we see, but most of it is tax exempt funding.
I just have a follow-up question. So you did say that you have worked in communities similar to the size of Montpelier, and a bond is expensive, and one of your results of your analysis and what we've heard for many years in Montpelier, that we just don't have the appetite to pay for something like this. And so I'm wondering, have you ever seen a successful regional partnerships with other towns to invest in recreation, more of a regional level rather than based at a city level?
The regional facilities that we've seen are usually dedicated to one sport, such as tennis or baseball, or swimming. And when you do something like that, it's possible to get regions to come together. The difficulty you're going to have here is that generally people won't drive more than 15 or 20 minutes to work out. So you have to have enough base of support within at the far end, 20-minute drive time for a kind of general purpose recreation center. And if you're going to create a regional facility, then let's say a regional basketball facility, and I believe there is one in your region, you have to have multiple courts so you can hold tournaments. So or baseball fields, you've got to have 4 baseball fields, you've got to have multiple soccer fields. And so one of the things we would do in a feasibility study is to talk to the neighboring communities and see if that opportunity exists. We didn't hear in our focus groups that there was necessarily an opportunity like that. But maybe we weren't listening. as hard as we should have been, and maybe there is one. Maybe it exists in the case of tennis or soccer. In terms of size, a community, one of our most successful centers is in a community, I think a population of about 8,000. And we're currently developing a facility in a town in Oklahoma that has a population of less than 2,500. It's a relatively poor community in the southeastern portion of Oklahoma. And we've actually brought I shouldn't say we brought in, but the Choctaw Nation came up and offered to help. And because of their help and involvement and their guarantee of a certain amount of the cost of the facility, it will become a possibility for the community and for the Eastern Oklahoma State College. So there are a lot of different ways to approach these things.
Thanks. Sal, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, one of the things I was hoping for out of this report was, because I know you also spoke with the folks at the hospital. And it seemed to me there was a portion of the report that included some conclusions from your discussions with the hospital. But was there any sense that a potential partnership or some sort of investment structure was possible with that organization? It seemed the only definitive conclusion that I saw was that they seemed to think that housing was a top priority and recreation was secondary.
That's a good observation. Our meetings with the hospital were of people that worked at a lower level. We did not meet with a member of the senior management team, as I recall. And the hospital did have a list of the things they were interested in, which they gave us or we took in the meeting, which were all things that made sense. I think one of the things we would need to do is to arrange for a meeting with the CEO and chief operating officer of the hospital and maybe the system people and explain to them in a little more detail what the possibilities are of doing this, because I think they would be interested in participating at a higher level. Housing is a big issue for them, again, because of the physician recruitment and probably senior staff recruitment issue. But I think we are a little did not get as much information from the hospitals we would like, and we'd like to spend more time with them because we think they would be a lot more supportive, as hospitals have been in other communities. The one thing the hospital is probably concerned about is, and would probably be hesitant to state, would be what their level of financial support would be. Because hospitals all over the country right now, with very few exceptions, are operating at near 0 to 1% margins, and they're not sure what's going to happen to them in the next fiscal year. And so they're very concerned now about spending money on capital or leasing spaces, because in the hospital business, you never know who's going to walk in the door the next day. And what more, even worse, you don't know what they're going to pay for the care you give them. So margins are very kind of nerve-wracking right now for everybody in the hospital business.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate your comments on the hospitals' misgivings about funding. I know they're all under a lot of pressure lately.
They are.
Anyone else up here at Tim?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting, and I was glad to hear you talk about the private-public partnership piece more in your presentation. It was certainly more than I get out of the written piece. So I'm glad to hear that.
Good.
I think
Tim, could you try to, oh,
not
okay,
loud enough.
I think we're good now.
Okay. So I think the only piece I would say is that the kind of your last line in the report is probably a good place for us to start. And basically, just read it briefly. It says concurrent with the study, an analysis must be completed that estimates the city's capital capabilities. And this analysis should also include both a long-term and short-term master plan to establish the amount of available funding for recreation. So I think that is a big challenge before this council and this budget comes up. I really think it's a place we need to start out before going too much into detail on our recreation plans.
I mean, I agree with that. It's, you know, we're making trade-offs here, and you know, a recreation is at this point, if you develop new facilities, is very much a focus on the future, and deciding how much money to spend on the future versus how much money you need to spend repairing things or reconditioning things that are damaged it's a really difficult decision to make. And you know, it's a choice that people have to make. And in our mind, of course, we're kind of always focused on the future. How can we improve communities? How can we improve people's health? And we think it's a worthwhile pursuit. But we can't be totally objective about that because that's our business.
Thanks. Any other question, Adrian? Yeah.
Just another follow-up question. So it sounds like your focus, obviously Power Wellness is, you know, finding partnerships with healthcare organizations. Have you had success in finding partnerships with organizations that aren't particularly like, you know, hospitals or insurance companies? Like, you know, we have a list of like 10 pretty large employers in central Vermont that range from cheese to coffee to socks to insurance. Like, you know, have you partnered with organizations like that for funding to offset city cost that goes beyond a healthcare organization?
Yes, we have. And it's interesting in the last couple of years, most of our new facilities have been developed with communities. They haven't been developed with hospitals. And we see our growth market as being more the community recreation facility. And there's a number of reasons for that. And one of the reasons is that hospitals are becoming increasingly complicated to work with. You know, sometimes if you get a hospital involved in an organization, it can slow things down. And recreation centers in and of themselves are not really very complicated facilities. And it's interesting that we just took over the management of 2 community recreation facilities in the last 2 years, where the cities knew that they weren't really in a great position to manage them because they are retail businesses. And that's the same problem for hospitals. So, in a recreation facility, you're only as good as the experience that your last customer had, whether they were swimming, playing basketball, working out with weights. We go to the hospital and we're not sure that we had a good experience. If we're alive, we had a good experience, but we don't really know because we're not in a position to judge doctors in the way or nurses in the way they interact with us. So certainly we hope they're pleasant and nurturing, but we don't know what the quality is of what they did because we're not in the medical field. With community recreation facilities, there's a constant feedback, and it's also a retail thing. You want somebody to join, and to be a member. And so you have to please them. And for cities, it's sometimes hard to manage those, and we've become a specialist in it. So we are doing a lot more with facilities. We also currently manage a facility for an insurance company in upstate New York and Albany. And that insurance company is very focused on wellness. And they said, we want this for our members, and we're going to offer our members discounts if they go there and work out. And which may be the future for a lot of insurance companies. So we would definitely want to talk to the large employers and figure out how to get them involved. And one way to get them involved is for them to commit to a certain number of memberships for a certain period of time. And that helps to build the base of the number of members we need to justify the expense of remodeling or building a recreation facility.
Thanks, Sal.
Just one more question. I know your visit was brief and it was interrupted and had to be rescheduled and so on. So I'm not sure you had time for everything you'd hoped for, but I wonder if when you were evaluating the existing recreation building on Barry Street, if you were able to review the report from GBA, the architects, the most recent report, Gazens Bachmann Architects. Did you see that report?
We did review that report. We saw what their plans were for abating the asbestos, for making the building handicap accessible, for updating the mechanical systems. We did see that report. I mean, they did a great job. But at the end of the day, there's no space to expand the building. There are limitations on the building. And we feel strongly to the point that before we spent $8 million on that building, we'd look at how far you could get with $8 million on Country Club Road.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just wanted to make sure you had that input.
Yes.
Judgment.
Yeah. And we thought the master plan that was done for Country Club Road, if I didn't mention it before, also was a terrific master plan. And the idea of getting housing up there is a great idea. And I think, it would be beneficial to the community.
Thanks. Any other questions from members of the council before I open it up to the public? Okay, anyone in the room who'd like to have any questions or comments? Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm speaking both to the Country Club Road update and that thing. I think it's good to gather information, but the presenter from Power Wellness has made clear that we're a long way from a business plan or a feasibility study. And so I want to call your attention back to and I can provide a transcript if you like, of the June 28th meeting of 2023, wherein there was a lot of discussion about Country Club Road, saying we want to be more involved. We need to be more involved. We don't want this happening, behind our back and coming to us with a fait accompli. The council directed, and the city manager agreed that there would be a full workshop dedicated to that in August. Unfortunately, a flood intervened. And the entire framework and direction that you were pursuing has been hijacked here. So I want to call your attention to pages 24 to 30 of what's called the actual plan, or was also referred to as a conceptual working draft. In fact, the city's website refers to it as a concept plan, an illustrative concept plan. It is not a master plan. It is not an actionable plan. It's a concept, and it has not been adopted by the council. So, but recommended next steps in chapter 10 of that document was to convene a working group for recreation and community zone. That's not a consultant. That's a local working group of people. An Abnaki working group, a housing needs assessment, an archaeological assessment, a permit assessment, a mobility working group, a railroad crossing conversation, secondary access. There's a long list of due diligence none of which has been done since that time in June of 23. So I think if you look at that 6 or 8 pages, you'll realize how far off the rails we have run. And what is being done is a drive to outrun Act 250 jurisdiction. The growth center document was so grossly incomplete and in effect a fraud upon the Regional Planning Commission. It's several members of which took exception last night at their meeting saying, wait a minute, you're taking away our prerogative of approval and integration and written findings of how it relates to a regional plan. So they're gonna have to deal with that in the concept. But my point is, look at pages 24 to 30 of the actual actionable working draft plan and direct that the city manager and planning director correct the website. It was not adopted. It is not the direction we are moving. We've got a whole lot more due diligence of ag soils, of hydrogeology, of wetlands, of et cetera, before we're ready to decide how recreation and housing are going to potentially compete with each other here. So I just want to sober the conversation back to the work we have done and get you back on course. I'm happy to make a transcript of that August 28th meeting or that section of it available. And I think you would be due diligence for y'all to read it.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room or online who'd like to address this?
Evening. Hello, Alan. Thanks. It's good to see you again. Nat Winthrop. I'm vice chair of the hub. I just wanted to apprise the council members who may not be aware that the hub, in coordination with Steve Ribellini, presented a formal offer to Bill Frazier back in late April of this year to purchase the clubhouse building for a price of $750,000, a quarter of the price that the city paid for that, the whole property with 134 acres. Plus a swap or purchase of 3 to 5 acres, more or less contiguous to that building to the east. Bill Frazier replied that he would need to wait for the Power Wellness report, including public input, before giving us an answer or presenting the offer to the council. So now, or very soon, is that time, and we intend to present a formal proposal to the council at your next meeting on October 23rd. Now, my colleague John Rahill will present just a brief history of our ongoing discussions with the city, which dates back a full 3 years.
John Rahill, architect with Black River Design, but more importantly, a tennis player trying to stay young. Ironically, 3 years from when we started this conversation, we just heard that where we have one court left, that by July next year, we will have no courts in Central Vermont. The Green Mountain Community Fitness is taking over the last one. So I thought a little history was useful, just we're sort of arriving at an exciting spot where the consistency of initial thoughts and the Power Wellness report, I think, are worth recounting. 3 years ago, we needed a place because we knew the courts were being reduced, and we couldn't find a building around. And I knew Steve Rivellini and said, Steve, how would you feel about putting another building on your site next to golf? We thought maybe golf is summer, we could mostly winter. Wouldn't that be nice? We could share locker rooms. He said, yeah, we could do that. And we presented our initial idea, which included some community space. We knew that there were things that would make the tennis, the racket sports more viable. And as a courtesy, we presented that to the city, and they got excited about it. They were planning either something at the rec field, or at the rec center, or maybe something down at the by the tennis courts by the rec field, and presented a couple of weeks later after we talked about joining forces up there. They presented to some of you were still here then, 3 years ago, the three directions, and they got direction from you to sort of pursue the country club site. We talked about the city introduced the concept of the public-private partnership, and we said, sure, we can get you grants, we can help staff. We need a daycare. You're saying you need a daycare. We were planning tennis. We don't want to duplicate services. We should be cooperating, and we got pretty excited about it. And when the city went and proposed to buy that property, we said, well, we should support this. And we worked very hard to support the bond. And that was some time ago. We understand the city had to do some due diligence and planning. And we're delighted that White and Burke planning process ended up sort of confirming that it's a great site for recreation. They designated a spot that makes sense for recreation, and it's certainly not exclusive of housing. So it's a beautiful site that's big enough for all kinds of stuff. Our excitement was partially because there's an existing restaurant there. We were going to share locker rooms. And the theory is that putting one building all by itself doesn't have the capability of having a family go and have one kid playing soccer and another kid in daycare. So the notion of having a site that's big enough to have multiple activities was really made a lot of sense. So we adjusted our plan actually and said, well, if we put a tennis building here, we could leave another spot for whatever the city needed here, knowing that the city might take longer to pull something together. So it felt very good, and we were delighted after the report that it all seemed to make sense, and it seemed to be those uses would coexist. We had a great meeting with Power Wellness, and we're delighted that somebody familiar with the notion of public-private can work. The hub wouldn't really be private. It's really public nonprofit, in case people were worried about, somebody getting rich on tennis. So we're at a place now where we're desperate for moving ahead. And after 3 years, we hope that we can in the next couple of weeks present a plan that really saves the taxpayers of Montpelier from having to wrestle with an expenditure that, when we know there's a few other things on the table, and look forward to coordinating just as we were talking about doing 3 years ago. We think that our recreation goals align very nicely, and look forward to that conversation and our proposal. And I'm happy to answer any questions that I've missed talking about.
Great, thanks. Phil. And you are unmuted now.
Okay, great. My name is Phil Dodd. Just to be clear, I'm not going to be writing about this topic for the bridge, but I did want to share some thoughts about the rec project. I actually don't agree with the conclusion that we should renovate the Elks Lodge and put in fitness and childcare facilities there. I think renovating the current rec center makes more sense. It's walkable for kids, and we need a basketball and pickleball facility right now. The renovation cost of 7.5, or I guess actually 6.8 million, is not cheap, but ultimately much less than building multiple basketball courts and a track at Country Club. I'd also note Breadloaf initially presented 3 estimates. This update is just of the middle priced one. So using some of the cheaper costs, you might be able to even get another $1 million lower than the 6.8. As an aside, I would note that Breadloaf's estimate has gone up 60% in 5 years, which just shows why it is so hard to build anything today, including housing. I attended or watched all 3 public hearings held by Power Wellness. It seemed to me maybe half the people speaking were opposed to a new rec center up there and preferred having it downtown. There is one piece of land that might be available downtown, the Arcade Miles site, but building a new rec center there would be costly too. I even question the need for Montpelier to build a fitness facility, meaning a weight room and exercise room. We already have Green Mountain Fitness nearby. The price to join Planet Fitness is very reasonable. I just checked, it would cost about $180 a year to join there. The estimate in the Ballard and King study was that an adult would need to pay $450 a year to use a new rec center without a pool. And that study did not include the cost of building a new $44 million center. I guess I question whether voters would approve a big bond for a new rec center when we have so many other municipal capital needs. Not to mention the recent report to the school board suggesting we build a new high school for $110 million. By contrast, working with a hub may be a more reasonably priced way to at least get some tennis facilities up there. I'm not sure we need any further study of these options. We've had the Ballard and King survey in 2019, then their study of the operational costs of a new rec center. And now we have this report. I think the council knows enough at this point to make a decision on its own. I just want to finish by pointing to what Tim Heaney brought up, that paragraph that said the city really needs to have a look at its capital master plan. And it would be helpful to understand all the possible bonds we might be considering or choosing between in the next few years, whether it's Country Club Road, Isabel Circle, water pipe replacement, wastewater plant, and work like replacing the pipes and repaving East State Street and North Street. I see that the city's bond policy is on the agenda for October 23rd. And I just wanted to ask Bill, is it possible we could see a capital master plan by then, or does such a thing exist?
First of all, the debt policy will be later than that. It won't be ready for the next meeting. Capital plan, probably we're shooting for the following meeting, the November 13th. But I just made a note to sort of for us to sketch out what bonds that we're thinking might be in the pipeline. So
okay, that'd be helpful.
Talk more about that later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Anybody else in the room or online?
Jack, can I offer 30 seconds since you mentioned the capital plan?
Yes, 30
The
seconds.
requirement in statute for the growth center expansion requires a capital plan to have already incorporated the costs of roads, sidewalks, water, sewer, et cetera, for the expanded growth center, meaning the Country Club Road property. So that's how deficient our application was, as but one example.
Thank you. Okay, are we ready to move on to the next phase of this conversation? Alan, thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, so Mike Miller, Planning Director. So this isn't, again, not a large presentation, just another update because we were already having conversation on Country Club Road. Made sense to sit back down and talk about, we had talked this year, in this fiscal year, we kind of had three major milestones and a fourth set of things going on. So the first was to do the zoning changes, which we did. We got those done and adopted. The next was to do the growth center designation. That application was submitted in June. We received some comments back and amended the application slightly in August based on the comments of the staff, and it was approved in September. And our understanding, based on the information that Steve Whitaker had sent to the board, they're reviewing with their attorneys what's, they're doing their due diligence and they're gonna get back to us. If there are any requirements that we need to do, obviously we'll go and do them, but as far as we've heard, we haven't heard anything. But we're waiting to see what they're doing. They're the experts. They're the ones who know the law. They've got attorneys on staff that look at these things. So again, the way the process works for growth centers, we're given an application, we fill out the application. I don't go and read the statutes to double check to see whether our state government is following state statutes. We fill out the applications, we submit the application. There's nothing underhanded coming out of my office. We're simply filling out the application, sending it in. They do their staff reviews. They send us comments, ask for additional evidence, which we did. The one change that was requested before the meeting in September, which we discussed in Bill and I discussed earlier in September, which was that they would only be able to approve. We had talked about adding in areas of residential 9,000 zoning districts. And according to statute, only areas that have sidewalks or who have sidewalks in our capital budget would be eligible to be put in. And so those areas that do not have sidewalks at this time are not in the growth center that was approved in September. So we will be getting those draft maps put together so the public can have access to see what properties went in and what properties did not go in. But that was good news for some projects. In particular, like the Northfield Street Habitat for Humanity will likely be a property that will now be in the growth center. So we'll have a couple of those, but we'll get those out to you when that's ready. But we don't have anything final yet. No written decision has been given to us. We don't have any written findings. So we just had the oral approval at that time, and we'll see at what time we get the actual written documents and whatever additional information they request. So that was the second step. The third step we've talked about is tax increment financing. We kind of stacked these as we did because we couldn't do the growth center application without the zoning amendment. We can't do the TIF without, well, we said we can't do the TIF without the growth center. Not entirely true. We can do the TIF without the growth center. It's just a larger application. It's a much quicker application. So that was why we were stacking them the way we did. It wouldn't have mattered because White and Burke hasn't been available. They've been rather busy. Their schedule is opening up. They are going to be sending us a contract, which we'll get in front of you in November. So you guys can review the contract about hiring White and Burke to put together a TIF application. And then the final piece is the due diligence pieces. And these actually reflect a lot of the comments Steve was just mentioning from those pages. We talked to White and Burke about what would be the next steps. We've also been talking to other developers about their processes and what should be the next steps. So you have a list in the packet of the different steps that we are undertaking right now. If you've got any specific questions, I won't go through bullet by bullet what we're doing, but there are due diligence steps that we are working on right now that will be going on into next year. So that's our plan for the rest of this fiscal year as it comes to Country Club Road are to do this due diligence and the TIF application.
And what is a reasonable expectation for getting approval of the TIF district?
I believe
For
they
timeline.
laid out a timeline. There's a lot of factors that go into it. It's not just putting together the application. There's also requirements in windows. If the council approves it before a certain time, then it ends up in 1 year. And so there's specific times that they've got in their work plan, but it would happen next year I believe in the later spring.
Okay.
I think it had to be after April 1st, had to be when if there was any vote, it would have to be after April 1st, or else it ends up in this year and then everything gets messed up. Because
And when we're talking about this year, we're talking about the base level of tax level. So after April 1st, you're in a new tax year. So I sort of think there's a special name they call it, but So when you're setting a TIF district and you're setting the base tax level, you want it at your most current grand list as possible. So it would be after that. I think the plan is that between now and then, we'll finish up whatever needs to happen with the growth center. If the state needs any more information, get the TIF work going. That takes a little while. Finish the engineering, finish the punch list so that by spring-ish, we're ready to go. We've got everything completed. We've got the entryway design. We've got a TIF district, and then that's when you all had then directed us to seek development partner. And presumably they'd spend, half of next year laying out what they want to do so that we would be ready to start building in hopefully spring of 26, right? 26.
I think that time, those charts with the times, dates, and the numbers and everything were one of the things that I was thinking about when I was at my eye doctor yesterday. I was telling, having a hard time reading some really small print. So I think that was
Should be able to expand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the goal would be that if we were going to have a bond vote, it would be we'd try to have it be in the March 26th. So that way it's in there. So that way.
Okay.
Because we can't get into 25. There's nothing in 25 other than March, and we obviously wouldn't be ready for that. So.
Yep. Any other, Carrie?
Yeah, I'm looking at the timeline that is included here.
Okay.
And it's looking a little later. I don't know if adjustments were made after you made this, but on here, it has a bond vote happening in 27 and building happening in 28.
Yeah, Josh and I looked at that. Sorry, we should have checked to make sure that the updated one got into the packet. It was, yeah, when we look at that, we were like, that doesn't fit into the timeline that we had discussed with them. And I don't know if that was just an error on their part or if there was a reason they had it there, but we don't see why there shouldn't be any reason why 26 wouldn't work.
Okay. Anybody else? And Tim and Palin, I don't see your hands up, so any other questions from members of the public? I think we're close to the end of this discussion.
I just ask a question. Mike, I'm just wondering about the scale of operations that we're thinking about. I was reading the other day that Vermont needs at least 24,000 houses, like, tomorrow. We're not going to provide them, obviously, but are the developers that we're talking to able to do things at scale?
Yeah, that's our intention. That's why we did the Whitenburg plan, was for us to kind of get an understanding of what the community would be interested in, what would be acceptable to the community. And that discussion came out and found that lower area of the country club, people supported high density housing, so up to 5 stories in height. So that could fit a couple hundred units in there. And obviously then you'd have lower densities higher up. We could fit, and that assumed there would be no housing within the recreation zone. There's always possibility that you could co-locate both a community facility and housing in the same building.
So you're thinking rental units, not single family.
That was the direction that the
Attached
public
or
gave. The
detached.
public actually gave very clear message that they didn't want single family detached housing at the country club, and that they wanted the density housing. That was.
But to say that, and that is clearly what the community said, doesn't mean they couldn't be, in some cases, condos. They wouldn't necessarily have to be rentals. The other thing is that, it's a plan and a concept, as was mentioned earlier. A developer is going to come in and say, here, they're going to look at this, they're going to look at the land, they're going to look at the engineer, all those things, and they're going to say, here's what we think will work. And they're going to present that to us, and then we will work with them to get what works. They're going to tell us what they can afford,
Sure.
what pencils out. And there may be partnerships where some of them are done in conjunction with Down Street or somebody like that to get affordable housing. There may be a master developer and then some developers doing different, so, you know, ideally it would be a neighborhood kind of thing where there's a bunch of different types of housing. But we need the people that do this for real to tell us what's gonna work. You know, one of the things that we heard from Whitenburg and talking with them is that they're trying to work with communities all over. And people are really having a difficult time making these projects work affordably to come up with, you know, price points that people can have. And they were optimistic about this because of the number of units, the potential number of units. This could, you know, as you talked about, to scale, this could work because a developer would have enough units in it to make it work for them, particularly if there was a mechanism like TIF or grant funds or some combination that helped buy down the cost of the infrastructure so that they could.
Are we talking to prefab developers as well as, I mean, are some of these folks constructing houses in factories or in panelized modules or something other than?
All sorts of things.
Okay,
All of
so the
them, yeah.
gamut.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of companies doing that at high levels of energy efficiency and
Right.
and profitability because they can do it at scale.
Yep.
Yeah, we haven't been talking specifics as much as we have about, because of where we are in this process, most of our conversations have been about what types of information do you need in advance? Because we're doing due diligence. We don't want to do things that aren't useful for you. We don't want to spend $50,000 on soil borings if you don't care about soil borings. What do you care about? So when we are ready to put out the RFP, we have the right information for you as the developer to be able to evaluate and make a decision as to whether or not you want to make that commitment to the city to do a project. And so we're trying to get that information because we're not developers, and that's what we're trying to ascertain. What information do you need so we make sure we have the right information? Because some of them they're going to want to do themselves. They're going to want to do their own market analysis. They're probably not going to want our market analysis. Or maybe they do want us to do a market analysis, but what is it we need to do? So when we put out the RFP, we get the largest group of people who are interested because we want to have a choice. We want to give you all the opportunity to have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a developer either, but I just have this feeling if we do it the way we've always done it, it's not going to work. You know, we need to find somebody who's got an idea, a new idea about how to go about it.
And that's, I think, what we're trying to set this up is that we will ask for proposals for
Get some
ideas
innovation.
and be able to, you know, if everything went perfectly, which it won't, you know, we'd be able to say, we've got all this stuff set up. We've already either built or about to build the water and sewer lines to the base level. So that's all done for you. You got this site, give us a proposal for how you can make the rest of it work. And, you know, we'll get all kinds of ideas, hopefully.
Thank you.
Tim.
Yeah, hey, Mike, I'm glad to hear that's the approach you're taking at this stage. I think I've heard the term the developer a few times. I mentioned it before, but I really think we've got to keep an open mind to having multiple phases with potentially, you know, different developers for each phase of this project. Yeah, I think the concept you mentioned, I think Bill, a master developer, or maybe Mike mentioned it. We're not that big. I mean, there's not that much profit in this to have more layers added. I think it's important to keep a perspective that each phase is big enough to be a standalone project. If somebody's really good at the first phase and they end up being the same group we want to work with for the second phase, we'll have that option. But I don't think I'd tie everything up with one developer right out of the boat.
And we're not making that commitment now. Obviously, we're a long ways, you know, you all will see and approve what goes out before it goes out next spring.
Yeah, it's just every time you mention, you say the developer, it makes me.
Well, I think that's shorthand, so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Thanks, Tim. Phil.
Yes, just a quick thought back to the recreation thing. I think I heard the idea earlier that perhaps you'd make some decision at the next meeting about which direction to go on the rec center. But if the master capital plan isn't going to be ready till the next meeting after that, maybe makes sense to have that in hand before you choose a direction. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe. Joe, have we lost you? We may have lost. Oh, Joe,
He's still on there.
You're still on there.
Just put his hand down.
Okay. All right. I think we're good. Thanks. We're not asking for any decisions tonight,
No, but if
but,
there's anything that you don't want us to do, oh, here's Joe.
okay, Joe, you're back.
Joe Castellano.
Joe, we're about to move on, so if you have something you want to say, please unmute yourself.
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if there's any concerns about the way we're going with any of this, please let us know. You know, to Phil's point about the next meeting, I think the idea with the rec thing is to keep the conversation going. We've been waiting for this. You know, we were going to, the hub has given us an option is to lay out what the choices are and see how you wanted to proceed with that. You know, the decision would be how do you want to proceed next? May or may not be a final decision, but the idea is that we now, as we're coming up, we need to make some decisions. We've talked about this for a while. We've got, you know, there's the options could be just focus on Berry Street. They could be do more feasibility. They could be, you know, any, you know, talk to the hub about their, you know, we'll hear their proposal. So I think there's a lot of choices that you can be leading us. And we didn't want to just dump all this on you tonight. You know, that with regard to the capital plan, I'll talk about that more later under the manager's report. But, you know, certainly we can try to get a list together of potential bonds that we know about now. Those can always change, but at least here's some of the things that might be on the table. So
I haven't heard anything that makes me think, well, we should stop the course we're on now. Another thing to throw into it is that I do think that it's I think everything Alan said was valid and valuable, but I also do think that there's some issues about how much appetite people are going to have for taking on debt, which might militate in favor of doing the best we can in the Berry Street location. But then another factor of Berry Street is that we've been talking about that would be a very good location for a homeless shelter and
transitional housing, and
something like
service hub.
that. And those are not compatible uses probably. So that's just another factor in that conversation, I think.
Can I leave you with one quick question? Where is the phase 2 due diligence that is recommended in your report? I
Okay,
don't see an RFP out there for doing all the necessary next due diligence, and it's not going to be done by staff.
is there an answer to that, Mike? Yeah, you don't have to answer.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, what we had was the council had allocated, I believe, 150,000 towards advancing stuff. The TIF is going to be 50-60,000, we're guessing. And so we had 100,000 for due diligence. And in our conversations with the Public Works Department, they felt that there's a certain amount of work that can be done in conjunction with, they did new RFP process. So they have this bigger RFP process, so they don't have to keep putting out RFPs over and over again. They have everybody there scored. We can work with whoever's the top candidate in that category who has already been awarded, and we can move forward on the list. So that's when we're talking about, we're already talking to somebody. We're talking to, I believe, VHB, who
Right.
actually was part of the White and Burke process, but they also were the winner for that
Right.
work. So they're going to be the ones who are going to be scoping that out, working with yeah, the water company. There's a water engineering firm that is
So-
going to be handling the water side. So
You were handling everything on the list.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Good to get it out there. All right, thanks, folks. It is 8:09. I think there's a good likelihood that the next item could take us beyond our 8:30 break time, so I'm gonna say, let's take our 8:30 break at 8:09 and be back here at 8:20. our next item on the agenda, which is third reading of proposal for the responsible contractor ordinance. And Kurt, I'm assuming it's all you on this?
It is. I'll just remind the council that I did send out even copies of, so the last meeting, we were told that Barry and Burlington had followed us. I think so we did a little digging into that, and what we learned was that Burlington had actually preceded us, and I think our ordinance was based on Burlington's, and then after their experience, they amended their ordinance to a much simpler ordinance to what they have now, and I sent that out. And then Barry has an ordinance that is slightly different. I sent them out to you, I think, yesterday. So it factors this in as a factor, but it's not as hard a line. So those were the two that we had heard about. We did chase down, and I think you've got all that. So just wanted to point that out, and I'll turn it over to Kurt.
Thanks, and I will open our public hearing. Kurt, you go.
Okay, thanks. I'm Kurt Modica, Public Works Director. So again, just to recap on this, the city of Montpelier has an ordinance that requires pay scales for contracts for employees doing contracts over 200,000. And we've just had, we've discussed at other meetings some concerns, the financial position that the city's in currently with the two floods and the pandemic. We're heading into what you'll see soon is a challenging capital plan, a lot of deferred equipment and deferred paving projects. So there's a lot of need, and this does have an impact on our ability to do projects, or at least the number of projects that we can do financially. So just to follow up what Bill mentioned, so Burlington's model is now, it's more like a minimum wage. So one rate that everybody has to at least be paid that amount, which to me is a much simpler way to manage it. It's easier for contractors to manage, and it's more equitable, I believe, to employees. And then Barry City, I don't believe has actually implemented theirs, and it is a little more complicated, but it's more of like a system where if people go through the process and commit to following the wage rates, then they may win the bid over someone else that didn't submit that information. But again, I don't think that's really been implemented, and so there's not a lot of case study on that. One other thing I wanted to mention is that I didn't have a lot of time to call contractors, but I did call one small contractor. He has a crew of about 6 local. And I just asked him, would this ordinance as it currently stands present a barrier for you to bid projects in Montpelier? And he said, absolutely. I'm generally on the excavator, like I don't have time to, manage the different pay scales for different employees doing different functions. So he has not bid a project for the city since this was implemented. And my concern is there's a lot of small contractors like that in rural Vermont. And so we're, through this ordinance, really creating, more, just really work for larger contractors that have the overhead staff to manage this.
Thanks, Kurt. One of the things that I am interested in is that at our last meeting, Representative Casey was here, and we talked about whether it would be possible for him to sit down with you and maybe someone from the AFL-CIO to talk about whether it would be possible to amend the ordinance to reduce the paperwork requirements, yet still achieve the goals of maintaining reasonable and fair wage rates for people working on city contracts. And was it possible to have any of those conversations?
No, I have not had any discussions with them directly on that. I think it would be helpful if If there was maybe a direction from council out of how best to approach that, is there interest from council in following the model that Burlington has adopted? So I like that model just because it takes away the tracking of individual employees doing different types of tasks, which is really what drives small contractors from bidding on projects here.
And so what do? Do they have a minimum level of wage rate that they certify that everybody working on this job is getting paid at least X dollars per hour?
That's correct, and they update it annually.
And do you know what that X dollars per hour is?
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay. Thanks. I saw Tim's hand first, so I'll get to you and then Sal and then Carrie.
Thanks. So just clarify, because I'm sorry, I missed the last meeting, but so what, this is the third reading on, weren't we putting the ordinance on hold for 2 years? That's what we started.
That is the proposal as it stands.
Okay. And so the refinement of the ordinance is also something that can happen over time then if we have 2 years to work
Yeah.
through.
Oh, you're totally right. That's one thing that could happen. Another thing that could happen is if there were an alternative proposal, then somebody could make that as a motion too. But so I'm just trying to make sure we're having a full discussion of the issues that are before us. Sal.
Kurt, does the Burlington, I think our ordinance currently says that a certain wage rate is to be used, the Vermont rate and the Vermont state rate and the cash equivalent of benefits. Does the Burlington revised model include the benefit cash equivalent? Which I think is a major obstacle for small 6 crew contractors as well. Often because not only is it more expensive for them, but the crew doesn't want it. They think they're going to live forever and they don't need a 401k and yada yada. So they'd rather have you put it in the envelope.
Yeah, I think I'd need to double check that. I believe there is a benefit component in there, but
We don't have a
not 100%
copy of the
certain.
Burlington ordinance.
Yeah, I sent it to you. I just don't have
You
it.
did? Oh,
Yeah.
is this it?
I think the way it worked under our ordinance, and I stand to be corrected because I'm not an expert on it, was that the wage rate, they didn't require people to have benefits. It just said, if you don't have benefits, then it's an additional 30 or 40% wage rate. So it basically made up for that compensation. So an employee still would get it in the envelope. It would just be a higher rate. And I think, the argument for that, or is that if the bidder knows that going in and bases their price on those wage rates, then it's not costing they're getting the money through the payment of the contract because they bid it at that rate. I think the real obstacle so I think there's two separate questions. One is the sort of ease of use and are we chasing off contractors? And then 2 is, is it making projects too expensive by people bidding? And so I think those are 2 kind of separate questions. And, they're both, I don't think we're ever going to have hard data on either one of them. I think, so that's, I think we're talking about.
Carrie.
Thank you for that last clarification, Bill. I think you're absolutely right. Those are 2 different potential obstacles that we're talking about. One is are we not getting the bids that we would want because the contractors think this is too administratively burdensome? And 2, do we actually want to pay that amount? And so I think it's really important to be very clear about those. So I think that this ordinance was put in place because we, as a city, decided that it aligned with our values that we do want to pay prevailing wage for these projects. So I think that question about whether we actually want to pay for this is answered already by the fact that the ordinance exists. If we have changed our minds about that and we no longer feel that we can afford to pay prevailing wages, then we should just get rid of the ordinance altogether. There's no point in putting it off for 2 years. We should just say, no, we're not, it doesn't align with our values anymore. if the administrative burden is something that we want to address, then I think that there's a variety of ways to do that. I think we probably could get better data about whether or not we're getting, that's an obstacle to people putting in bids. But I can believe that looking at the way it is now, asking the way we structured it with the sign in and sign out and everything looks like a real pain. I can see that. We had talked last week about the idea that maybe we could get rid of that part of the ordinance. We could amend it so that that is no longer a requirement. I also really appreciate that we've got the Barry and the Burlington policies here, because the Barry one includes a provision that says the city manager can waive this at any point during the process based on certain conditions, which could be, I mean, it's listed in here, but it's pretty broad. And it seems like we could, sorry, let me just pull it up. Get rid for only the work can only be performed by specific vendors for whatever reason. No other responsible or responsive bidders are identified. An emergency situation, loss of available funding, among other things. So there's a lot of conditions under which I think we may find ourselves falling into right now. If we're getting one bid on a project, then maybe we say, okay, we're waiving it for this project. But to build that into the ordinance, rather than to have the council say across the board, we're waiving it for all of them for 2 years, regardless of what happens, I'm not okay with. And then I just want to clarify about the Burlington ordinance. It's a livable wage ordinance. It requires a livable wage, and that's it. So that's very different from prevailing wage. It's a lot less than prevailing wage for construction projects.
As we've been talking, I found it and it's $15.83 an hour.
So I don't think that's a good model. I don't think it's a comparable model.
That's not very high, yeah. Any members of the public who wish to be heard on this, since this is a public hearing?
Yeah, I'll be ever so brief, Steve Whitaker. I again want to make sure that we're not dissuading contractors from bidding. We got a lot of work ahead of us with the whole East State, with a lot of projects. And if we only got one bid for School Street, imagine what's going to happen if we make it more complicated for the contractors. So I don't have a position. I appreciate Carrie's well-reasoned support of making sure that the values are sustained here. And that can be done through waivers or a more surgical approach to waivers. But I don't want to create a situation where we're not getting competition, because we'll end up not getting our projects done because we ran out of money on the few projects that consume the budget.
Any other member of the public present or online who'd like to be heard? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. And council, we have options. Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I still strongly support the values that underpin this, that as a community, we want to be paying a fair wage for the work for people coming into our community. And we've heard repeatedly, these kinds of jobs that folks can't even live in our city at the wages that they're sometimes getting paid. I like the idea of trying to work to simplify it. It does sound overly burdensome, and that is one factor in getting fewer bids. I think the idea of a simplified policy paired with a waiver process. So when we have extenuating circumstances like a massive flood and other things, that you would have some flexibility in how it's implemented, and that could be, brought to council for big projects that, you know, we're planning to waive that requirement in this case because of these circumstances. I think that is a reasonable approach to maintain the values, but give yourself the ability to be, you know, if there's some big, and it seemed like the kind of examples at the very ordinance gives us some language. So, I mean, for me, I'd love to move in that direction. If, you know, the majority of council votes today to put it on hold, like as Jack said, I guess people could keep working on an alternative and bring it back to be considered at any point. But I mean, I'll be voting against the suspension at this point, but if we keep it in place, it sounds like it should be fixed and improved no matter what. So I think that's the direction I'm leaning right now. And yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. Anybody else? So,
Well, I too like the idea of, I mean, I guess not too, since you might not like that idea. I like the idea of putting it on hold while we try and fix it, because I frankly don't think we can afford it. We just spent an excruciating budgeting process trying to save what, $1.5 million we had to take out at one point. If we're talking about $2 million over the next 2 years, and it's not like it's all in one chunk, but contract by contract for those 2 projects, that money has to come from someplace. So if we have to pay it for infrastructure work, we can't spend it someplace else, and we just don't. I don't see where we have it. We're just in a fix. I think the prevailing wage does align with our values. I just don't think we can afford it. If there's a way we can fix it, let's try and fix it, but let's suspend it until we have a version that we think will better fit our budget and encourage more competition for the work that we have.
is someone going to make a motion? Tim?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we suspend the prevailing wage ordinance for 2 years and study it and carefully decide how it will move forward.
Is there a second?
Second.
It feels like everyone who wants to say something about this has already said it over the previous several conversations about this, but I don't want to foreclose debate. Is there any discussion about the motion before we move to a vote? Okay. We will
do a roll call.
We will proceed by roll call. Adrian? Carrie?
No.
Sal?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
Palin?
Yes.
And Lauren?
No.
Motion carries 4-2. Okay. That is it. Thank you. Yes.
So what will the process be now to try and revise it? I mean, will we have a working group, or how do we come up with it, and how will we go about amending it?
Well, things are kind of wide open at this point. We have 2 years, and anyone
Motion
wants
did
to work on it?
include studying and designing how it can be improved.
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be, we'd maybe come back to with suggestions for that.
Uh-huh. Okay. Next up, parking ordinance, third reading. Kelly. And as you're walking up, I will open the public hearing.
Great. Okay, Kelly Murphy, Assistant City Manager. I am gonna go over just where we're at with the parking ordinance. So in the packet, there's an overview of the changes that have been made to date with the parking ordinance. For this third reading, the items that we took a look at were clarifying language associated with section 10-708 for determination of parking over time. I can read that language if you'd like, or we can just move ahead. So I'm going to keep going unless you'd like me to read it. And then the second section that we took a look at was section 10-719B, which was the parking violation hearing appeal process. We added language to include duration for those hearings and to provide detail on what type of hearing it would be, whether it be remote or in person, and how you can make that request. And then the last was to adjust some of the gender specific language to be gender neutral and non-binary. And that was really in section 10-724. So I'm happy to go over any of the changes at this point or take questions.
Any questions from any members of the council? Any comments for any members of the public? Steve?
Yeah, Steve Whitaker again. I think I was instrumental in convincing y'all you needed to revise this, but this doesn't come anywhere near close to due process or even due diligence by the folks who are pretending to amend it. There is no objective, impartial hearing body convened by this ordinance to hear appeals. There needs to be somebody who knows the rules of evidence. There's no clarification of how evidence is entered in, which is what I've been trying to do. You know, I've been trying to enter evidence since 2019 that the fire hydrant was 12 feet or more that from the vehicle, whereas our police say 6 feet from a fire hydrant, and there was no yellow curb to indicate that that's a fire hydrant zone. And y'all just don't care enough to do your due diligence and do this process properly. So your ordinance is in violation of constitutional due process protections, and it's half-assed attempt, and it's putting more crap on top of crap that has accumulated over years. And you really need to do this right. And you obviously don't care because I've spoken about it at the first hearing, and you're not listening. So I'm disgusted with the level of management that we're paying top dollar for, and that y'all are willing to eat it, you know?
Are there comments from any other members of the public? Seeing none, I will close our public hearing. Council members, are we ready to vote on this proposal? Is there a motion to approve the proposed amendments? Lauren?
I move we adopt the proposed amendments to the parking ordinance as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion before we move to a vote? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We have completed work on that. Thank you. Next, we're to item number 10. Holiday meeting schedule, which in our packets. Bill, that's you, I assume?
Yep, let me just pull that up. So we do this every year about now, because as the calendar falls, typically, with Thanksgiving being the fourth Thursday, we usually don't want to meet the fourth Wednesday. And then Christmas always falls, usually that fourth week of December, and we usually don't want to meet that week. So, we typically move the meeting a week up in Thanksgiving and a week up in December as well for Christmas. One thing that I'm proposing that's a little bit different, it's part of the quirk of the calendar, is because January 1st is a Wednesday, that means January 8th is technically the second Wednesday, which would normally be our regular meeting. Usually our first meeting after the holidays is still a budget workshop. So I'm proposing that we continue that as a budget workshop and actually have the following week be the regular meeting. And then we do have to move the other meeting up because of the petition deadlines, although I think that actually falls this year to the fourth week, so it's not a problem. But basically, we'd have the regular meetings on the third and fourth week, holding the second Wednesday for a budget workshop. So that's the only quirk of the calendar this year. And then otherwise, and I think the only other caveat is legally the deadline for petitions is Thursday, the 23rd. And so in the event that some years we've held our final public hearing and everything on that Thursday night, just had a Thursday night meeting instead of a Wednesday night, which we could also do. I think last year we did, and maybe the last couple of years, we just held it on a regular Wednesday. And if a petition came in just once, we just held a special meeting, a Zoom meeting, 5-minute meeting at 5 o'clock to accept the petition and add it to the warning. And so I just want to point those out. I think in some ways that's easier. People are following a budget process, and then why is your last final hearing on a Thursday night? So it's a little easier if people can follow on Wednesday.
I think it's also
So that's the
people, members of council have Wednesdays built into their
Right.
schedule.
Yeah. So that's my recommendation, but obviously you all can schedule these however you want. Might not get much attendance on the fourth Wednesday of November and December, but that might,
Work for everybody? So we'll need a motion to approve this. Carrie,
I'm sorry, I may have missed it, but December 19th or December 18th? December 19th looks like a Thursday.
I'm sorry. Yes, it should be December.
Should be the eighth.
That
Okay,
was a touch.
just making
Yes.
sure.
Thank you. Good catch. With that amendment. Number 20.
okay, were you getting ready, raise your hand, Adrian?
No, I just made sure that it was right in my calendar.
Mhm.
Very confused.
Yep. All right. Is there a motion to approve this schedule as amended?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we don't have other business that I'm aware of, so we can move to council reports. And because we've got so many people in the room on this side, Adrian, you're up.
Nothing for me.
Okay, Carrie.
Nope.
Sal. Tim,
Nope, thanks.
Palin. Lauren.
Just a reminder, tomorrow evening, the Montpelier Commission for Recovery and Resilience. So Thursday evening is having our next public forum, trying to gather feedback on the MAPLE plan, the emergency response for city and community. So that's 6:30 p.m. at the high school tomorrow night. So hope people can make it out. And there will be other ways to provide feedback if you can't make it. Thanks.
Great, thanks. I've just got a couple of things. One, I wanted to note that we received a check from the Montpelier Housing Authority in the amount of $14,688.42 as a payment in lieu of taxes for Pioneer Apartments on Main Street. And there was a long time when the Montpelier Housing Authority, I believe, was the only tax exempt property owner that was actually paying taxes. I'm not sure if they are now, but I certainly appreciate the payments we received from the Housing Authority. And the other thing I'll note, and other people may also note it, that we now have a retail post office location right here in Montpelier. And soft opening just this past Monday, and I visited there, and there will be a grand opening on Saturday morning. What I've heard is that there will be coffee, cake, and balloons. I don't know what else there are going to be, if there's going to be speakers or anything. Haven't heard anything from the post office about inviting me or any other members of city government to it, but it might be a nice thing to be there anyway. But it's good news for the people of Montpelier. City clerk.
Just note that voting is underway. It's reasonably robust. We've gotten about 1,000 ballots back so far. So it's happening. Encourage folks to send in their ballots, and if they don't want to send in their ballots, they'd rather vote on election day. It's easier and better and quicker if you were to bring the ballots you were sent and vote with those. Otherwise, you have to sign a little thing that says, I'm not trying to vote twice, a little affidavit, but that's a little slower. But yeah, that's it.
And people's early ballots are getting checked in as they come in, right?
Yes, thanks to wonderful volunteers, not exactly as they come in, but we are gradually moving through them. It's just the volunteer turnout for the few weeks leading up to the election, and the election is just enormous. It's just been incredible. We always have good volunteers, and I always run these elections with volunteers, but I've never seen anything like this one. So it's nice. It's great to see.
So all you voters out there, if you get your ballot in early, then that will stop you from get out the vote calls from the parties, because they'll know you have already voted. So that's a little incentive.
Don't promise that.
Well, city manager's report.
To that end, I got a text from Maine, a 207 phone number during this meeting saying that you don't have much time left. This election is extremely tight, and Trump needs your vote to win. So I was guess that people in Maine, they want me to go to Maine to vote for Trump. So I don't know if that's voter fraud or not, right? I'm registered there. I actually have uncharacteristically a lot of things tonight, so try to bear with me. Some are announcements and some are questions. So one announcement is, and they're in just the order that I've written them down here. You noticed in the presentation about the Country Club Road housing that we were trying to make it the top regional priority. Those applications are actually due this week. We didn't have it on the agenda, but I just want to make it clear that that is what we're pushing for. If it does become the top regional priority, then it is in great position for the Northern Borders grant for $2 million. So I would, given all our prior votes on this, I assume that was the case, but wanted to mention it. I sent you out an email from Central Vermont Home Health and Hospice about how to handle their ballot. And last year we didn't vote to put them on the ballot. So I think their question is, do they petition or do they get put on the ballot? They want to know sooner than later so they can petition if they need to. And I said I would ask, and that it was possible that we get an answer, or it was possible that you would ask to have it put on a future agenda. And that I'll get back to them tomorrow.
Karen.
So I was reviewing the history and the policy, and I don't remember voting to change the policy. That the policy was that if they were not asking for any additional money, that we would automatically put it on the ballot.
I didn't either, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm personally not a giant fan of that whole process, and I think it's worth talking about the whole process in our budget process. But I think for now that is the case, and they're not asking for anything additional, so that they, according to our current policy, they shouldn't have to petition.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that's-
Although if we wanted to change that, I agree, we should figure that out very quickly, but I don't know if that's realistic.
How many hours?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Another one, interesting, Confluence Park. I know we've already voted on this. The question came, so there are grants out there. And Akasha Ranjo asked me whether basically, was it the city council didn't want to spend the money or they don't want to do the project, i.e. if I can raise the full sum of money, without the city needing to do it, are you still okay with doing the project? And the reason for the some, sort of urgency is that she's got to report to people who are holding funds for this to release them. I said, I don't know, so I will ask the powers that be. So
Needs to be warned as an agenda item.
I thought we voted to terminate the project,
but you did, and so I think the question
whether
did that
they have
mean
the
there was-
money or not.
Okay, if
That was
that's-
my understanding.
So
But
I guess that's
maybe others.
I agree.
that. I mean, you did vote to terminate the project for sure.
Yes.
And I think the question, did that mean terminate the project?
Mhm.
I'm seeing.
Because I agree, if we're going to reconsider it, we should put it on an agenda. So I just wanted to see if people agreed that termination was determination.
Lauren.
I might suggest, I mean, knowing that one of the projects, and there's lots of conversations happening about the whole river's edge. So like the Commission for Recovery and Resilience, and there's lots of conversations with the state, who obviously owns a big chunk of the land along there, like maybe recommend to Kasha to go to talk to the people working on that project and just see if there's, I don't know how long she could hold money, but I mean, I could see like a different kind of iteration of a proposal coming back that a future iteration of council might be interested in. So to just say, don't tell like no way, never, but there might be, I don't know, like I just think there's going to be future
Yeah, I think
conversations
there's some that
happening.
she
And
really
so,
needs to know.
yeah, so
quick.
she might have to for that forfeit, but I think she should be in conversation with the other processes going on.
Then that's what I will tell her. That's fine. Let's see. We talked about the capital plan tonight. I just wanted to update everybody quickly on where we are with that. We are working to put together a capital plan. The committee is Lauren, Carrie, and Tim. And we are hoping to get that group together in October this year, end of October, a couple weeks. Not have a date yet to work. Last couple of years, just because of timing, it's really sort of been, here's our plan. What do you think of it? This year, I think we're going to have options and try to work with the committee to put together the plan with the idea that we'd bring at least a preliminary plan to the council on November 13, so that people could see it. But we are, adding the projects and all that kind of thing. So that's what's happening. And I thought a good point tonight for us to get a long list of potential bonds over the next few years, to just have to work that. So that's happening.
We have some bonds that are actually being retired in the next few years.
Yep,
too.
we do.
So,
Exactly. But
so getting a full picture, very good.
right. Let's see. Sal did a bang up job representing the community at the VLCT annual meeting.
Stayed away.
He rammed everything through. That got everything passed. I think, more importantly, though, that the league board did sort of sign on to this effort to push state on homelessness efforts. So it's not just sort of the communities, the loose consortium of communities, but it's the League of Cities and Towns as a whole. So that's helpful. Which brings me to the homelessness meeting that we're gonna have next week, the workshop. I have invited state, Chris Winters and his team. I've invited all our elected officials, our state reps. My thought is that we would ask the state administration what their plan is, what they are doing, what, they've had this thing. And then perhaps take that list of requests that were made by those communities, or including us, and simply say, go down through them and say, is this feasible? This is feasible, kind of, these are recommendations, both short and long, because some of them are legislative, some of them are administrative. And see, at least use that as a framework for the conversation. And then obviously there will be other things that will come up and we'll want to talk, but that would be kind of the loose agenda for that meeting. But if there's anything else, or any people had a different vision of how to do that workshop, then,
Lauren.
Just not remembering off the top of my head. does that list include all of the recommendations that our homelessness task force?
We could put those in too.
I just wondered, like, add those to our list
Right.
as well to ask the administration about and.
Yep.
see.
I think I'm almost done. Yeah, so the last one is budget. I just also wanted to go over where we were working on the budget. So we will be talking about the budget at the next couple of meetings. So this is more of just a preview. So our plan, the next meeting is to outline some, what we know. And also for you to be thinking and to give us feedback of how you would like the budget process to go. We had some talk last year about wanting to make some changes, but we never really settled on what those were. So the next meeting, part of the idea would be, how would we like to see this roll out? The meeting after that on November 13, our goal, what we're shooting for, is right before you all hear us talk about the budget congress that we do, the staff meeting that we work on this. So that's gonna be right before we do that. And so we're hoping that we will have a full draft of at least the general fund, of what we will be looking at. And what we were hoping to share that with you all before we go into those meetings. So, I mean, it will be a big.
Which meeting is that?
November 13th.
November 13th.
It'll be a big, huge number. And, basically it's going to be, Sal mentioned we had to cut $1.5 million. It's going to be like that or more probably this year. So it's going to be, is there anything you'd like to weigh in as we go about to do our work? Do you have any feedback for us as we then sit down as a staff to do this? So that, I think last year, just through the iterations of the process, we did our thing and then came through and the council said, gee, we really didn't want to cut anything in police, fire and public works. Okay, well, so you have those kind of conversations in advance of this meeting, make sure we're reflecting the goals and priorities of the council. So having said that, like I said, we'll have more detail, but just so that you're thinking, we know that we need to increase our capital by $300,000 for paving or whatever, our equipment probably by 300,000, actually even more. We're probably looking at this over a couple of year period, 2 more bumps to get to where we need to be. Those are both big, large jumps. We cut everything, all those lines out of the budget. So if there's a thought to put, housing trust fund money back in, or lobbyists or the arts fund, any of those things, those all got zeroed out last year, homelessness task force, all that stuff. So as we think about that, if those come back in, those are starting from zero. We've been told that our health insurance right now is a 23% increase, which would be a huge, unsustainable jump. And I think people all around are hearing that. And we know we were short some positions, so we would probably start with, at least what we think we need for staffing. So I'm just telling you this because, I think Sal mentioned hellscape or something. I don't know if you said it or we were thinking, or maybe we said it in the office today, but it's going to be, a lot of fun again this year too. So buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride. And a lot of tough decisions to make. So part of the reason I just flag that, we'll go into those more detail next meeting, but also to talk about our process. Ideally, November 13th, we'll have hard numbers to share with you to get some guidance from you. And then on December 11th, we present the actual budget presentation. And then we're off to the races. So on that note, I'm done.
Oh, boy. All right. And at 9:05 PM, we are adjourned. Yeah.